So here's the thing. When it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, there's a specific idea that has made its way around the NHL over the past, let's just say, few years before the pandemic hit, and especially during the pandemic. It's the idea of, quote-unquote, weaponizing your cap space. And for the most part, when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, they have not been a team that has been interested in weaponizing their cap space. The entire Jim Benning era was filled with shortcuts and band-aid solutions, and oh, we got a few wins, so let's go out there and make these trades and try to do something. Try to make the playoffs, get in there. Anything can happen. We live day by day. Doesn't seem like we have a plan. We just take things as they come. And the Vancouver Canucks ended up making trades that didn't really help them heading into the long term. I'd say the biggest, most guilty trade that they made was, one, the Andrei Kuzmenko trade in 2024. But then I'd also say that a big underrated contender is the February 2020 acquisition of Tyler Toffoli. A trade where the Vancouver Canucks sent away a draft pick and a prospect and Tim Schaller for the last few months of Tyler Toffoli's contract. And generally speaking, the Canucks, they did improve from that move. Tyler Toffoli came in, Brock Besser was hurt, and so Toffoli was that guy in the top spot, and he was actually really good. But then the league shut down because there was a virus going around, and then they came back a few months later to play in a COVID bubble playoffs that actually saw the Canucks do pretty all right. Now, the unfortunate part with Toffoli is the fact that the Vancouver Canucks didn't end up keeping him, and essentially gave up Schaller, Madden, and the draft pick as well, for only a few months' worth of play out of Tyler Toffoli. Not to mention the fact that other beloved free agents-to-be like Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom both left too, because, in the famous words of Jim Benning, the Canucks ran out of time. They didn't have enough time to properly assess their financial situation and to put offers on the table for these fan-favorite, locker-room-favorite type of guys. The reason I bring up the Tyler Toffoli trade is because it came at a pretty ill time in the Vancouver Canucks' story. They were a team that was on the outside of the playoffs looking in. They were in a decently competitive spot to contend for a playoff spot. And what? They trade away a prospect, a pick, for a guy that was a rental? I think it's fair to say, with 2026 eyes, that you don't trade for rental players if you are a bubble team. If you are a relatively young team where your best players are young, like Quinn Hughes, who at the time was 21, Elias Pettersson, who at the time was, I think, 22, when you have a team that is just not there yet, you don't trade away young assets for win-now rental pieces. And I think this is one of these examples where the Vancouver Canucks totally did not weaponize their cap space. And there have been moments throughout the years where I honestly, goodness to gracious, thought that they did that. I remember the first JT Miller trade when the Canucks acquired Miller for a first-round pick. I actually said in our video when the trade was made that, yeah, the Canucks are weaponizing their cap space because the Tampa Bay Lightning, they didn't want to pay this guy $5 million a year to be in their third line, and the Vancouver Canucks are taking advantage because he's a 50-point player, and they're getting him for just a first-round pick, and Marek Mazanec and all that other stuff. Not really the biggest package in return if you ignore the first-round pick that was included there. I got flamed when that video was put up on YouTube, but then again, 1 year after, I think a lot of Canucks fans started to agree with my take, because Miller had 70 points in his first year with Vancouver. What more do you want for a first-round pick return? But ultimately, we haven't seen any situation over the years where Vancouver has really weaponized their cap space in the traditional sense, where Vancouver identifies a team that has a cap issue because they have too many guys making too much money, and they acknowledge, hey, you have goals that rely on you freeing up cap space. Why don't you send over a player that is overpaid to us, and for us to take that player on, it'll require you to send us a draft pick or some other meaningful asset or whatever, just so we have an incentive to take on that money. And then you can free up some salary on your behalf and you can do what you need to do. Vancouver hasn't done that in the same way teams like the Arizona Coyotes, like the Chicago Blackhawks, like the Montreal Canadiens have done that. You can take a look at all these examples, from Marian Hossa to Pavel Datsyuk to Chicago being the mediator, the third team in these trades. You have Montreal that did the same thing with the Sean Monahan acquisition and then other trades throughout the years. This was a pretty good way for teams to maximize not just the amount of cap that they are spending, but also the value and the quantity of the assets in their prospect pool and draft pick pipeline. And the Vancouver Canucks have never done that because the Vancouver Canucks internally, I think there was always this idea that said, oh yeah, like we're going to contend. We're going to do well. We don't need to weaponize our cap space because we need to use our cap space for players that'll actually help us out, like Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland. Now, it's 2026, and the Vancouver Canucks are the worst team in the league. And I wanted to refer to a tweet made by Cody Sivertson on Twitter that talks about some of the comments that Ryan Johnson made from his press conference. Cody said this: Ryan Johnson talking about being positioned to have the cap space available to take on quote-unquote situations for extra draft capital and being a team that can build players' value for the trade deadline is one of the most surreal things I have heard from a Canucks GM in ages. Hope is weird. Essentially, Cody is referring to Ryan Johnson's commentary on Vancouver legitimately, under the common definition, weaponizing their cap space, using what available funds they have to spend to help out other teams for a price in order to acquire more value. It's that, and it's the ability of being able to look at your team, analyze who is doing well, and capitalize on who is doing well by trading these guys away at the trade deadline to get more value. This is genuinely the direction the Vancouver Canucks should be going down when you consider the fact that they are now entering a, hopefully, 5+ year rebuild. You trade away Filip Hronek because he is a player that can help out a playoff team that probably would demand a price. You trade away Pettersson because maybe he can do the same. You analyze the team and you acknowledge that, yes, these guys are good, and some of these guys could probably fetch you a lot of pieces in return. Not to mention the fact that Vancouver could be on the receiving end of some big nasty contracts that expire shortly in order for them to get the most value possible in these drafts and prospect pools. Now, there is a question as to whether or not Francesco Aquilini, as the owner, would be okay with the team spending money on guys that aren't going to play for them. Like, oh, you acquire Pavel Datsyuk, you acquire Marian Hossa, you acquire the ghost of Shea Weber, you acquire the Carey Price contract. These are all examples where guys with big deals went over to teams because they're not playing. And the teams were like, okay, well, we'll pay you, but we're not going to use you. We understand that. We're just taking on the contract so we can get draft picks. Vancouver can do that. It's just whether or not the owner would be interested in shelling out money for people that are not actually participating in on-ice activities or even participating in practice. Who knows if he'd be interested in doing that. Now, Daniel and Henrik Sedin did say that this new regime has 100% autonomy. I'll believe it when I see it, but obviously just hearing that word, it is optimistic from the get-go. Now, there also is another conversation to be had as to whether or not weaponizing your cap space is even all too possible these days, with the cap going up significantly over the next few years. This ain't the same flat cap that we had exhibited throughout the face of the COVID-19 pandemic over the years, and for Vancouver's sake, you gotta hope that some of these teams are just willing to shell away bad contracts, because if it opens the door for making these weaponizing cap space trades, Vancouver should be all up over in that. But you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about this weaponizing cap space thing? Do you think the Canucks are actually going to execute? Let me know in the comments your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.